If there's one thing I've learned, it's that getting outside is always worth it, no matter the weather. Welcome to Humans Outside, where we're building a life around spending time in nature while learning from fascinating outdoor-minded guests. I'm Amy Bouchatz, a journalist originally from the beach in California, now working to love nature from my home in Alaska. Since September 2017, I've spent at least 20 consecutive minutes outside every single day, no matter what. Ready to hear from experts and outdoor lovers who make heading into nature just a part of who they are while we work to do the same? Let's go! There's no escaping it. Heading into nature brings with it discomfort. One of those discomforts is boredom, or at the very least, boredom in the way we often think about it during our inside lives. You're away from the constant parade of indoor tasks, or, if you were lucky, unplugged completely from the distraction of internet and entertainment. But have you ever considered that boredom might also be one of the reasons being outside makes you feel happier? Michael Easter is a journalist, professor, and author, and in 2019 he found himself on a 33-day caribou hunting trip in the wilds of Alaska's Arctic, looking for insights on what happens when we ditch everyday comforts for spending time doing hard stuff outside. His new book, The Comfort Crisis, Embrace Discomfort to Reclaim Your Wild, Happy, Healthy Self, takes a deep dive into the why, how, and outcomes of ditching the things that make us super comfortable and instead chasing a life that purposefully seeks out discomfort every day. Today, Michael's going to talk to us about his adventures for the book and why being uncomfortable and bored in nature makes you happier. Michael, welcome to Humans Outside.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so it's so cool to talk to you. I enjoyed your book very much, and I can't wait to talk about it today.
Good. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
So we always start a podcast imagining ourselves in our guest's favorite outdoor space, like we were hanging out, doing whatever it is you do outside, having this discussion there with you. So, being all imaginative and stuff, where are we hanging out with you today?
Well, I like outdoors that is accessible, but also feels a bit wild. So I live in Las Vegas and I live at the edge of Red Rock Canyon, which is this national conservation area. And there's this whole trail network that's like right by my house. And if you take enough trails, you end up on a trail called Blazing Saddles. And it goes, kind of winds around this mountain and it goes up over this big saddle and it's super rocky and interesting, and you see desert bighorns out there, and it's amazing. So that's where we are.
So I had a friend who recently went there. So I've seen pictures recently. When we say red rocks, these suckers, they're red. This is not an exaggeration or a leap of logic. They're actually orange red rocks. Like, this is a very brightly colored place.
Yes, it is blaze red. It's kind of like what you see when people see photos of southern Utah, like in Moab, like Arches National Park. I mean, it's that sort of red, that same sandstone. But it's also interesting because there's a lot of different like layers in the rocks. So not everything is that red. And then you get a lot of rocks that are, from the seabed and are like black, and they're super kind of, they're beautiful, but they're also sharp. So as you walk across them, if you don't want to trip because it's like a cheese grater essentially. But it's a super cool area. And I think, people think that Las Vegas is just the Strip. Totally not the case. I think it's one of the best outdoor towns in the country, to be honest. There's a ton out here and it tends to be pretty quiet. Not many people out in the desert.
Yeah. So we're in a place with you that is visually something that we're probably not used to. Very good. Very cool. Okay. So you've had a long career in writing about the outdoors. You've worked for Men's Health, Outside Magazine, and of course you've got this book, The Comfort Crisis, which goes deep into spending a lot of time outside. But how did somebody become this person? How did you become someone who likes to go outside?
I grew up in northern Utah, and I think there's a relatively strong outdoor culture in Utah, especially, with all the ski resorts, so much access to the mountains. I was sort of mildly into the outdoors as a kid. My mom would take me hiking and stuff like that. And I could have taken it or left it based on, there's also video games available, which are pretty stimulating. But probably when I was about 12 or 13, I read the book Into Thin Air. And I think that got me really interested in just spending more time outside, which is kind of strange considering that, the book is about this disaster on Mount Everest. But I don't know, it kickstarted me to go do more stuff outside. And I took up mountain biking pretty heavily in high school and college and, rock climbed and just started spending a lot more time outside. And I don't know, I think that sort of carried on into my later years as well.
It's funny you said, like a book about disasters on Mount Everest makes you want to, just sort of opens your mind to that. But I mean, that's so true. Like we read these books or we read about these big adventures and you can kind of remove yourself from the disaster part of it and imagine yourself having the adventure. I don't know what's going on with that in the human psyche, but that's totally a thing.
Yeah, I think it definitely is. I mean, we picture ourselves on these big epic things and we don't really consider the realities of doing that in the moment.
Yeah.
And I think in the moment, any sort of big epic outdoor thing, it has moments where it just totally sucks and it's miserable. But then when you get back, you're like, man, I learned a lot out there and I grew from it and I kind of want to go back out there.
Yeah, that's type 2 fun, buddy.
Yeah.
Forget the pain and remember only the good stuff. So, yeah. But you've described like a pretty normal outdoor life. So like a normal trajectory to that. Mm-hmm. So how do you go from like just normal life of doing outside stuff to hanging out on the Arctic tundra for 33 days? And I mean, let's just say like I have not spent 33 days hanging out on Arctic tundra, but I have been there. So I can confirm there's not a lot going on there.
No, there's not a lot going on there. I worked for Men's Health magazine for maybe 6-7 years. And now I'm a professor at UNLV, but I still write for Men's Health and Outside and a bunch of other magazines. And through my work, I ended up meeting this dude whose name is Donnie Vincent, and he's this backcountry bow hunter and filmmaker who does these hunting documentaries that are, I kind of describe them as more like Planet Earth, but with hunting than sort of normal hunting stuff you see on TV. Yeah. I mean, they're amazing and beautifully shot, and he's really thoughtful and articulate about the whole process. So anyways, I end up writing a profile of him, and to write that profile, we did this backcountry hunt in Nevada for maybe 5-6 days. And it was cool. And we became good friends. And I sort of, noticed that after that hunt, I felt a lot better. And that it sort of threw me into like all these different forms of discomfort that we just don't face anymore in modern life, the fact that, it's freezing cold the entire time, hungry the entire time. Everything we do takes effort, from like going to get water, having to hike down, 5,000 feet and then bring it back up, all this different stuff. And so when he invited me up to the Arctic, I sort of jumped on because I thought maybe there's some greater idea there and maybe I could benefit from it. It's like, all right, we're going to do this. I mean, it was definitely out of my comfort zone, I grew up in a single parent household and my mom worked a lot. So, I got a lot out of the outdoors, but at the same time, like I didn't have a person who was taking me out all the time, if that makes sense. Like I just didn't have like, let's go hunting, buddy, or let's go camping, buddy. It's like my mom is literally working all the time because that's what you had to do,
Yeah. So
I just didn't have that much experience with anything that crazy. And I was like, yeah, let's try this thing. So I signed on and definitely had, it was amazing. It was challenging. I think it was all the things that I wanted out there. It's like everything was difficult, challenging, uncomfortable. But there's also, moments of just pure amazingness and like being totally removed from modern life, as it were, for that long. I mean, that totally changes you for sure.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I want to go back to something you said, which is not what we're focusing on today, but I think is a really important point for those who are listening to this, which is that you don't have to come from a background where you have somebody taking you outside or going like where adventure or these big things are your norm to make that be your life now. People think they have to have like this big background in this stuff to have it be accessible now. And really, it's like, being open to the possibility is not to be too woo woo, but just like being open to having that be something that you do is such a huge step and really like the most important step.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I like to talk about when I talk about this book and how people absolutely lose their minds when they hear that I was out there for more than a month. But it's like humans evolved in nature for like 2.5 million years.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
we don't spend as much time in nature in those environments anymore simply because you were born in the last 10,000 years.
Yeah.
So it's like everyone is capable of spending extended time outdoors and can figure it out. It's just like a learning curve, but it's like,
Yeah.
people think they can't do something. Like, no, you can do it. You just haven't done it yet.
Totally. And it doesn't have to start with 33 days either. Like that's a very
No.
extreme way to jump in. It's not, I mean, you didn't start with 33 days either. You went on this first hunt with him and
Yeah.
kind of got a taste. But, it really just starts with open your door, step outside today. And see where it takes you. We were talking before we started recording about my 20 minutes a day. And that's how I started, right? Was saying, okay, like what happens if I go out for this minimum amount of time every day for just a year? What happens? Like, will
Yeah.
I want to do it more? Will I be super uncomfortable and quit? Because sometimes it's extremely cold here and that's not that fun, you know? And I find now that 20 minutes really isn't enough. I keep it that way because in the winter time, it sometimes is enough.
Yeah.
But really, like, I want more. I want to be out longer. And it's sort of like a gateway drug in the best possible way. And, so just, guys, just open your door, step outside. Don't feel like you have to go into the Arctic for 33 days and not take a bath. Maybe that's where you end up in your wildest dreams. But right now, just like go outside, man. Check
Yeah.
it out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like nature is oftentimes like right outside our door. It's on tree lined streets. It's in city parks. It's on the edges of town. It's really easy to access. And like but I also, one of my messages is that I don't fault people for not wanting to go outside initially. It's like
Yeah, totally.
the human brain evolved to want to be able to predict the future, and outdoor environments are unpredictable. There's a reason that we generally have defaulted to spending 95% of our time indoors,
Right.
because the outdoors is unpredictable, it's uncomfortable. I mean, there's all this, human evolution, 2.5 million years of time being like, why wouldn't you just sit inside? Like,
Totally.
it makes way more sense to sit inside. But we also know that sort of going through that uncertainty and braving some of that discomfort of the outdoors, it delivers real physical and mental health benefits.
Yeah. And it's like what you just said, like you realized you wanted more. Like you went out for a couple of days and you're like, whoa, that was pretty great. And that isn't that just how it goes? Like, of course you want more of something that makes you feel good. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
That's human nature too. But you have to keep yourself open to the possibility that the thing that's going to make you feel good or happy, like we're going to talk about today, is not the logical thing. Because logic says if there's not a bed and a toilet, I'm not interested.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay. So you go up to way north of where I am, just for like people's perspective. Okay. Everyone knows I'm in Alaska and I'm in Anchorage, but Alaska's humongous. So how far away from where I am were you when you were here? Like we're talking
I
like
think the
long.
flight was like 2 or 3 hours to get up to Kotzebue.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were probably 100 some odd miles above the
Right.
Arctic
So
Circle.
so you're like hundreds of miles from where I am. I mean,
Yes.
it's all but a different world. uh
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm like, I know people always imagine I live in some sort of crazy wild place. I live in a subdivision, guys. All right. There are no igloos. Mm-mm. In fact, it's like 80 degrees in my house today. Okay. So, you were on the Arctic tundra, which is like this whole different thing. And when we moved to Alaska, we had never been here before, and we pull into a campsite where there is some tundra. And although not like what you were at, and my husband and I stood there like the pioneers of yore, looking at this stuff. Like, what is it? Like,
Yeah.
it's like squishy, or like poking it with our feet, right? So it was just such a weird experience. So describe for us, what is Arctic tundra like? Because this is sort of the stage of where you are. Describe, like, what is it like to sit on? What is it like to walk on? What is it like to live on for 33 days? What is it like?
Yeah, it is. I describe it as like a mattress that is covered in partially inflated basketballs. So the mattress is sort of this, it's like grass and moss that's kind of like sort of frozen. So it's really soft when you step on it. And
Right.
the basketballs are what are called tundra tussocks, which are these sort of densely wound big balls of grass. And you can step on them, but they're kind of awkward and wobbly. So, I mean, walking across the tundra is super challenging because it's like, if you step on the mattress, it's like you have to put more energy into each step. It like sucks all your energy and momentum as you're walking. But if you step on the basketballs, they're obviously very awkwardly shaped, and you could easily roll an ankle. So it's a tough landscape. And it's, where we were, it's a lot of really, really old mountains that have sort of been, just defiled by time. And so they're generally kind of like almost rolling mountains, if you will. Yeah. They just roll on like forever. And I think that, the landscape is so big. You totally get messed up in terms of the distances. Like you have a really hard time gauging distance out there. Like what we thought would be a mile or 2 miles would be like 6, just because everything is so far and open, and there's like no way to really get a good perspective on anything.
Yeah. So squishy, soft, good for napping ground, followed by lumpy mountains that are like shaly, and shale's like this flat rock that slides under your feet. P.S. It's awful. So it's like rocks. I hate rocks. Okay, so it's like squishiness, and then slidey rocks, and then more squishiness.
Yes.
And as you mentioned, like there's literally nothing going on there. It is you and those 2 other dudes who you're with, and animals who are mostly evading you, and some ravens, and that's it. Right?
Yeah.
Like nothing.
Yeah, there's nothing. Yeah, there's nothing up there. There's nothing up there for like 100 miles.
Yeah. Okay. So with nothing, and no self-service, and nothing, and more nothing, all right, you experienced a level of boredom that you paired with research for your book about what boredom does to your brain. So, what does boredom do to your brain and body, and why?
So, to back up, why do we get bored in the first place?
Yes. Why? And then tell us also, while we're backing up, why do we get bored in the first place? And then what, like from your experience, what is that like?
Yeah. So boredom is uncomfortable, right? And there's a good reason for this. So as humans evolved, boredom is this evolutionary discomfort that basically told us whatever we were doing at any given moment, the return on our time invested had worn thin. So think of if you're like out hunting and you need food for the night. If you're not seeing any animals, it becomes boring, right? So this is this like discomfort that kicks on that tells you, go do something else. Go try and go find some other way to get food. So it used to be this thing that was pretty good for us because it would compel us into doing something else that would be productive to help us survive. But nowadays, obviously, boredom has changed a lot, where we now have these really easy, effortless escapes from boredom. So now it's like anytime we're bored, we feel that discomfort, we can pull out our phone or watch a screen or whatever. So boredom has kind of become something that we can very easily fix with something that I would argue is not as productive, right? I don't think many people pull out their phone to like read War and Peace. We're like looking at, Twitter or whatever.
Right.
So, up there, I didn't have that easy escape for boredom. So what happens is just like what would happen, a million years ago, is that your mind starts to look for something else to do, and it's uncomfortable. You're just like, oh God, like, what am I going to do? So I could only stare at nature for so long, right? Like, it's beautiful up there. Don't get me wrong. It's amazing, but I can't stare at it for 12 hours a day. Just no way. So I would do things like read the labels on my energy bars and look at all the ingredients and read those. Like, oh, this is interesting. So Cliff Bars, it was named after the guy's father. Okay, interesting. Like, this becomes fascinating. I'd read like the labels on my jackets where you're like, hey guys, these down jackets we're wearing, you can't dry clean them. That'll ruin them. Just remember that when we get back, which is obviously like just random BS. But at the same time, I also did some stuff that was pretty productive. I came up with a bunch of story ideas for the magazines I write for. When that became boring and I didn't have any more ideas, that discomfort of boredom would kick on, and I would write some of the book. I had all this time with this pen and empty notebook, essentially. So I wrote some of the book. When that became boring, I just sort of burned out on that. Wrote all my Christmas lists down, that kind of stuff. So I argue in the book, it's like we need to reintroduce boredom into our life in a way where we don't just default to the easiest escape, like a screen. Because if you think of how humans have adopted screens and digital media, it's like 100 years ago, there was zero digital media in our lives, like none. Now you look at the data, and the average person today spends more than 11 hours a day engaging with digital media. Now that's obviously from cell phones, but that's from TV, that's from your computer, your iPad, your radio, whatever it might be. So this thing that was like never in our lives has essentially become our lives because we have this discomfort of boredom, and we can very easily cure it with a screen or some other form of digital media. But we also know that boredom has benefits in telling us to do something productive, do something interesting.
Yeah. So it's funny. As we discussed before, I was listening to your book on audio while I was running, and of course was hearing you talk about these stats in the book. And I'm glad you just noted that that's engaging with your radio too, because I was like, oh my gosh, am I ruining my statistics right now by listening to this book while I'm running? Of course, when you're running, it's like very boring, right? So you put your brain on whatever you can. I don't run with music ever. So it's either a book or a podcast or nothing. And I do try to balance the two because I recognize that there will be times that the input is not an option, and I still want to be able to do what I'm doing. I don't want to be in a place where I'm like, I don't have this, therefore I cannot do this other thing. But I'm like, oh my gosh, am I like ruining my boredom time by listening to this guy? So it was a real crisis of conscience for me. And I think it's interesting you talked about how you came up with like story ideas and whatnot. Did you come up with any like crazy things that you're like, what? Why did I think that? Because you were so bored?
Oh, well, yeah, I just didn't write them down. I mean, it's like when people, so the other reason that I think that we spend so much time on devices and stuff is like, it's uncomfortable to be with yourself, because if you just monitor the thoughts in your head, you find that the person inside there is a raving lunatic, right?
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
It's like you're constantly just like thinking of weird stuff and like, where do those thoughts come from? And then you have to start asking some hard questions. So by going into our cell phones, it also provides an escape from actually getting to know ourselves and introspecting, which can be a slightly uncomfortable process for sure.
Right. Hey humans, just a quick break to ask for a huge favor. If you are loving this episode, could you take a second to give us 5 stars or a great rating and review in whatever podcast platform you use? Those ratings help other humans find the podcast too and spread that Humans Outside love around the world. I can't thank you enough for listening and sharing your support through a rating and review. Now, back to the episode. Talk to us about, going back to that initial question, what does being bored do to your brain? Is there like some sort of chemical thing happening here? Is there a hormonal thing happening here? And give us, and your body, and why?
Yeah, so I mean, to put it simply, your brain essentially has two modes. I describe in the book. There's focused mode and there is unfocused mode. So anytime that you are focusing on anything in the outside world, now this could be your cell phone, this could be a conversation with someone, this could be reading. Your brain is having to put in quite a bit of work to process this incoming information. So it's kind of like this active, almost like workout type mode, basically. Right. Now, when you're bored and you are mind wandering, this is more inward focus, right? Like you're not, you're just kind of like inward. And this fires on what's called the default mode network. And the default mode network is essentially kind of like this period of rest and reflection. So it gives your brain sort of a break and a rest period from that active focused mode. Now, I argue that with the introduction of all this tech in our lives, we are spending a lot of time in this focused, sort of taxing focus mode, and we're spending less and less time in this sort of unfocused inward mode that can be restorative. So I think you look at a lot of the research, and it seems that like our collective just lack of boredom and also just focus on all this media stuff is leading to a lot of, burnout, mental fatigue, even things like anxiety.
Yeah. Okay. So, then we have factor 2, which is discomfort, right? So this comes into this. I mean, this is the theme of your book, right? Broadly, but boredom is a part of discomfort. So is just doing hard things, right? So what is the intersection of boredom and discomfort and doing something challenging, whether that be challenging just to you because you already went on a hunting trip for 5 days and 33 is like, no incredible leap of logic, although it kind of is, or challenging to me, which would be something entirely different, right? So what is the intersection of those three?
Between the outdoors, boredom, and doing something challenging?
Yeah.
Well, I think they're all, it's, they all come into play when you go outside. Unless you're bringing your cell phone and just, I don't know, spending all your time on Instagram while you're outside. But basically, like for me, by going outside in this challenging environment, like I'm throwing myself into a lot of different forms of discomfort, right? So you think about modern life now, it's like we are, I argue, most people, most of the time, if you live in the US, you are very rarely facing the same discomforts that our ancestors faced for millions of years.
Sure.
We have climate control. We have easy access to food. We do not have to you could walk 1,000 steps every single day, which is like nothing, and be fine. You would live on, right? You could live to 80. You'd have terrible health, but we can still prop you up with machines and medicine, right? So by going outside and doing something, hard outdoor, whether that's even just, like a backcountry trip or even just like a long hike, all of a sudden you get reintroduced to all these forms of beneficial discomfort that we used to face in the past. Like it's inevitable, right? You are going to be doing something physical outside because when you're outside, like everything takes a bit of effort. You're naturally moving more. You're naturally facing the elements. Food is often at a premium unless you've packed in a ton of food, which means then you're also having to carry it. So,
right.
you're probably going to be bored unless you spend the whole time on your phone, which, I mean, some people do. And I argue it's not a good idea. Part of the benefit of going outside is facing that discomfort of boredom. So it's like you get reintroduced to all these discomforts that we've essentially engineered out of our lives.
Right.
Which has made sense. And I'm not arguing that, modern life isn't great. It obviously is. But the balance has tipped too far where we are never uncomfortable, never doing these things that in the past we used to have to do all the time and are therefore adapted to, and know that they can offset a lot of the downsides of sort of the easiness of modern life. I don't know if that answered your question, but hopefully.
No, it does. So that gets to where I'm kind of going with this, which is what all of this has to do with happiness, because you're saying, okay, we've abandoned this, for our modern lives, that being inside isn't terrible because, like, obviously it's great, right? Because it's really comfortable. Okay. So what's the point? Why does this make us happier? Why even bother?
Yeah, well, it does make us happier. And so I'll tell you about this idea called toughening. There's a lot of reasons, but this is one of them. So you look at the research on people who have faced challenges in their life. And the old idea in psychology was that, like, any challenge that came a person's way, it was bad. It was just bad, right? If something really challenging came your way, it was hard on you, it was too traumatic, and then you're going to be scarred for life. But we also have sayings like, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. It's like, well, what does that mean? That kind of flies in the face of this old idea, right? So there's this researcher who goes, I'm going to test this. And he basically he's done all kinds of different surveys and studies on this idea. And what he basically finds is that, yes, people who have had a ton of challenges in their life, their mental health and physical health is not great. On the flip side of that, people who have had too little challenges face equally poor rates of mental and physical health. There's a sweet spot where humans need to hit this sweet spot of challenge. Because what happens is when you challenge yourself, you learn something about yourself, right? Like by going out into an environment where, there's a risk of failure, it's maybe a little bit sketchy, XYZ, you learn a lot. You learn something. You learn what you're capable of. And I argue in the book that, we're sort of building these new environments where, like, we're just removing all kinds of challenges from our lives and making things so much easier that we never put ourselves in positions where we are forced to have to sort of quickly adapt and overcome something that was hard, and therefore get this amazing learning opportunity about what our potential is. And I think the outdoors is a way to engineer this idea into your life.
That's that's a lot to absorb, especially if you're somebody who, like, sort of shies away from that or doesn't want to take that risk.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think that we are wired to not want to take risks because for 2.5 million years, doing something that was inherently risky was a dumb idea because our environments were risky all the time. We didn't have safety nets. We didn't have a Garmin thing where we could press a red button and all of a sudden, 5 hours later, the National Guard shows up to rescue us. We would have to hunt for food. Like, everything was hard. Right. So, like, of course we are just going to default to whatever's easiest and safest because that is, like, wired into us. But again, our environments have changed so much that we're a victim of our own success in a lot of ways. So,
sure.
You look at mental health rates right now. I mean, they're off the charts with depression and anxiety. And there's obviously not just one reason for this. There's a lot of reasons for this. But I think the overarching thing is that we don't face discomfort and challenge, right? We always do the easiest thing. And quite counterintuitively, this actually makes us miserable over time, right?
Right.
Like, if you get bored and the easiest thing to do is to go onto Instagram, like, that's probably going to have some bad effects over time. Not only are you taxing your brain, but you're also, like, comparing yourself
Mm-hmm.
to people, right? If you're not going outside, we know that time in the outdoors is from lots of different doses, from research all over the world, that being outdoors speaks to humans and seems to improve our happiness and decrease our stress levels and increase our levels of calm. So this is kind of counterintuitive, because it's like you don't want to go out there, but once you're out there, you're like, oh, this is nice. I'm glad I did this. It's kind of like a workout, right?
Right.
Working out sucks. No one wants to work out, but when they finish a workout, like, do you ever think, oh man, I really wish I wouldn't have done that? Like, no,
Right.
no one ever says that. We have to go through discomfort to get benefits, ranging from, physical health, mental health, emotional health.
Yeah. So it's like what you were saying earlier. Like, why wouldn't you want to do something that makes you feel good? Obviously you do. It's getting that, it's inspiring yourself to take that risk, like you were just saying, to find that benefit to in something that's totally counterintuitive. You know, and then the result is that, well, what do you know? Like, you do feel better. Okay. And there's all sorts of parallels to this. So getting back to the subject of boredom, though, and how this intersects with this, I think being bored, like finding a way to cut that tie, is really hard. Obviously, it is not hard to find a way to be bored, right? Like, you just ditch your stuff and go into the middle of nowhere for a really long time, right? Like, easy. Okay. It's getting to yourself to the spot where that's okay with you. That's what's hard. So,
yeah. And I think that, I like, after coming back, I just try and think, like, how can I insert more boredom into my life? And I don't think it's that hard. It's like, if you go for a walk every day and just leave your cell phone, don't bring anything with you, like, you're going to have time where you're forced to go inward, and you're going to see your mind kind of wanders to different areas. Now, like I said before, you're going to have times where you are just thinking of absolute nonsense, strange nonsense. And that's fine, because you're also probably going to get some good stuff out of it too. So boredom is really, it's neither good nor bad. It just tells your brain to, like, do something else. And increasingly, though, the problem is that something else is always like digital media, right? So by not having that option, by putting yourself in a position where you don't have that option, you're going to go to different places that I can guarantee are far more interesting than the 7th dumb video you've watched on Instagram that day.
Right. Or not. Yesterday I had a conversation with somebody who they call the Badger. Okay. And this made me think, well, what if people had given me an animal name, what would that be? And I thought to myself, no, you are not thinking about this right now. You will be bored later. We will think about this then, and we will discuss. What
There you go.
if you were an animal? What would you be? Right. I mean,
right.
but like you talked, I imagine you talked a lot about food on your hike, because that's what you talk about when you're hiking, when you're hungry, is like what you're going to eat. Right.
Totally.
So, yeah. So like, no, we will save this topic for later when we want to explore the exact nature of the hamburger we're going to have when we get back to civilization.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And the flavor of milkshake and the size of milkshake and the contents of the milkshake, and on and on and on. I mean, you could go on this diatribe for the rest of your life just talking about breakfast cereal and, the cereal to milk ratio. Believe me, I've had these conversations, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So there you go. So other than like what you just said, which when you say it like that sounds like, well, yeah, just leave your phone home and go for a walk. Hello. Do you have some other tips for getting and staying really bored in nature so you get to a place where you can unlock that happiness that we're talking about, that are maybe not, maybe they are obvious. I don't know.
I take it at minimum a 20-minute walk outside every day, and I just leave my phone. And sometimes that, I'm having fun, I'm having some good ideas, and all of a sudden it's 45 minutes or an hour or whatever it is.
Right.
I think that, in the book I write about this concept called the nature pyramid, that basically the research suggests it's kind of like the food pyramid. But instead of, saying eat this many servings of grains and this many of meat or whatever, it basically suggests different doses in different kinds of nature. So at the bottom of the pyramid, it suggests that 20 minutes 3 times a week in the type of nature you can find, on a really tree-lined street or in a city park. That's associated with decreased levels of stress, increased levels of focus. The next level is 5 hours a month in a little bit more wild nature. So this would be stuff like, a bigger state park or something where there's like more, trails and more trees. It's a little bit wilder. It's not as manicured as a city park. And then at the very top, there is 3 days in a row, once a year in backcountry nature. Now, this is, I don't think I gave you the benefit on the 5 hours. So the 5 hour benefit is a lot lower levels of depression, increased happiness. At the top of the pyramid there's a ton of benefits at the top of the pyramid, but basically what happens is your brain goes into, starts to ride what are called alpha waves. And these are the waves that are found in experienced meditators. So they're associated with just like really heightened life satisfaction, increased levels of happiness, just like, I feel good, right? And also increased levels of creativity. So it's like your brain needs this time of like complete removal, time in really wild spaces to sort of as a reset every year. I sort of frame it as. So this is why it's good, once a year, go camping, go out, go do something outdoors. And if you're the type of person who really is just like, I would never camp, I would rather die than camp. You could even, I asked the researcher about this, and you can even just rent a sort of off the grid cabin. But the whole point of all this, the whole rule to all this is that you can't be using digital media the whole time, because that seems to cancel out a lot of these effects, because it changes your focus. Like you're supposed to be sort of lightly focused on the nature, spending time in your mind, but sort of observing it all. And that just goes out the door if you're using your phone in any capacity.
Yeah, interesting. I am guilty of taking my phone. I will confess. This is my confessional now. I am guilty of taking my phone on my adventures and being dismayed / delighted when I actually have reception. It happens.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, especially if I go far out, when I go on my walks around, just like out in the desert or in my neighborhood, I don't bring it because nothing's going to happen. But when I go on like longer runs out in the desert, I mean, it gets pretty hot. Like if I were to break something out there, like it would be a little sketchy. So I'll take it, but I just turn it off,
Yeah.
Because there's even just having it on, but in like airplane mode, it's really easy to like pull it out and switch it to airplane. Like even just having to turn it on and that it like boots up and whatever. I mean, that's like enough of a barrier to entry that I'm reminded like, yeah, don't touch the thing unless this goes south for some reason.
Yeah. So easy. And I wanted to mention, if listeners want to hear more about that 3-day effect and all of these sort of dosage stuff, you can listen to episode 119 of Humans Outside, which is at the end of season 3, and hear from Florence Williams, who wrote a book on this subject. So I'm sure, Michael, or have talked to her before. She's pretty great.
Yeah. Yeah. She seems cool.
Yeah. So, okay. So, thank you for giving us these insights and these tips, for helping us get bored and stay bored outside and, find happiness through that. At the end of our episodes, sort of like, take a left turn and talk about some stuff that I just really want to know. So I love to know my guests' favorite and most essential outdoor gear, because I spend a lot of time outside in Alaska, and I like to buy stuff. I'm an American. What can I say?
Yeah.
But I will say, sometimes guests say, their favorite outdoor gear is snacks, and I can get on board with that big time. So there's no wrong answer. Tell us, what is your favorite and most essential outdoor gear?
Probably if I'm favorite. Oh man, I don't know. I have trouble with this one because like I have some friends that, I think that going outside for them is more just an opportunity to buy shit.
Yeah, that's true.
So I kind of am just like, you're gonna be fine. Like mountain men used to walk around in like a piece of leather and they lived. You know what I mean? Like
This is the
we're
perspective of like living on mountain house meals for 33 days,
yeah,
right?
like
Like,
we're gonna be fine. And I like, you go to REI and it's like, oh well, this one's $100 more. Well, what's the difference? It's like, well, it's shaved. It's like 4 ounces lighter.
right.
It's like, well, why don't you just like not like don't have a cheeseburger a week before? And I mean, that's the difference. So I just saved you $200. Um, I don't know. I guess just like good. And I'm thinking of some trail shoes I love. I'm trying to remember the company. I think they're from Innovate.
Mm,
They are. I can't remember what they're called, like Terra something. But the cool thing about them is that they have some sort of, which when I was told about this and read, I was like, yeah, that's some BS. They have some like fiber, I think called like graphene in the sole. And the whole idea is that it like doesn't wear out as much, like the very bottom. And, I thought it was BS, but they've actually lasted much longer because like the desert out here is super gnarly with sharp
right.
rocks. And
Right.
I just go through shoes at a stupid rate and these have lasted a lot longer. So those are rad. I like them and they fit well. I tend to run in them well. I really like these Hanwag boots that we had in Alaska. They're rated down to -40. And what
Mm,
was amazing about them is like they had zero break-in period, and yet they are like gigantic, which I assumed like I'm going to have to put so many hours on these things before I'm not dying in them. And they were just like, oh, put them on. They felt good. So it's
yeah.
HAN space WAG. So probably those two things.
I find it's like the little things in life too. But if you aren't somebody who spends a lot of time outside, my hope is like listening to this gives you maybe a insight into the things you should be focusing on. Because like you said, like you could just go buy stuff, right? But the thing that's going to make a big difference is if you are comfortable or not. And that's has a lot to do with if you're warm and if your feet are good. Right. And
Yes,
so
totally.
you are not the first person to talk about hiking boots because that's a huge thing that if your
Mm-hmm.
feet are uncomfortable, you're like, I am out, why would I, like there's discomfort and then there's like just being stupid, you
Yes,
know?
exactly. It's like the point, I kind of think about it like, a boxer doesn't become good by just taking punches in the face. Now, getting punched in the face is part of being a boxer, but that's not how you improve about it, right? It's like some
Right.
of the stuff is going to have hard and be hardship, but we're not trying to get punched in the face out here, you
Right.
know?
Exactly. It's that balance between be prepared and be willing to take the risk.
Yes, totally.
And like the feet are a huge part of that and staying against, I mean, this is like a problem of living in Alaska, but I focus a lot on staying warm. A lot of
Yeah,
other people focus a lot on not being too warm, right? So there you go. But
yeah.
I think a lot about that. And for me, it all comes down to like drop admitting that different jackets have different purposes, step one, and
Hmm.
and that I should actually spend a little money on the one that's going to keep me the warmest.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's a good takeaway. And I find that like kind of like once you're at a certain level in my experience, like everything is pretty comparable,
yeah,
but it's like, yeah, I mean, there is definitely, especially when you're in an extreme environment, it's like you do have to get to a certain point in your gear. You can't go to Walmart and just grab whatever, right?
right.
But I tend to just kind of like not overthink it
No,
too
totally.
much.
And the
Yeah.
other thing you said that I think is really important for people is like if they fit you well, and that's a
Hmm.
huge deal for me. So my favorite outerwear is by Mountain Hardwear, and that has absolutely nothing to do with anything except for it fits me. The end.
Yeah. And
Right?
I've heard
Like,
like a lot of women, especially, say that like so much outdoor gear like does not fit them well.
yeah. Yeah, it's a real problem. I know, especially in the hunting community, it's a
Yeah.
huge problem in the hunting community because gear is just not made women specific. It's less of a problem in like the generalist outdoor community. But like
Hmm.
for example, I have extremely long arms. Nike, just as an example, they anything with thumb holes in their gear, like you'll have those shirts with the thumb holes. Those
Yeah.
thumb holes hit me just below the wrist. like up my arm.
Oh, wow.
So like
That's
they're
crazy.
way too short, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm rolling with shirts, long sleeves that are supposed to be up to my knuckles, but actually stop at the bottom of my wrist without even getting to my hand, this item is not serving its purpose and it is not for me.
Right. Totally.
Right. So like you have to know your body and know what fits. And I appreciate the recommendations and talking about this stuff, because it makes such a big difference to people who are just really getting their feet wet on this, or looking for ways to problem solve around why going outside hasn't been their favorite thing. Maybe that's because your feet really hurt because you don't have good boots, or because you're extremely cold because you thought, like me, that this one jacket that you own surely would be enough for all of the purposes in the land. And it's not. So
Yeah, totally.
Well, spoiler alert, Debbie Downer. Okay. So to close us out, I love to just sort of like go back, sort of like we started. We heard about your favorite outdoor space where we're pretend having this conversation, but walk us out with sort of envisioning that favorite outdoor moment that you have. Like if you close your eyes and take yourself back somewhere, like I'm picturing myself outside right now. Where are you and what are you doing?
Yeah, I'm kind of a fan of more like the quiet moments. Like I'm one of those people on a camping trip or whatever who gets up at like 5 a.m. and just like goes out alone. It's definitely those. And I've had a lot of them. Like especially up on the Arctic, I would go, one morning I went out on the tundra and just like stood alone as the sun was rising, and it is unbelievably silent up there. And, after just a second, like start to hear my heartbeat, and it is like, it's so quiet out there that my heart is like a kick drum. It's like boom, 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 and then I can hear like even the blood from my carotid artery, like pushing blood into my brain. It's like you never experience silence like that ever when in the modern world, so I think moments like that nature gives us, things like, seeing an animal at a certain, point in its life, it's like, oh my God, that's amazing. So some of those more like quiet, observant moments are totally what I think mostly what I go out for, to be honest. I mean, like all the type 1, 2, 3, whatever the hell they call it. I still don't understand that scale. But I mean, those are cool, but like, I really like I have to put those in so I can get those quiet moments,
I do know. Michael, thank you so much for talking to us today on Humans Outside. We sure appreciate you sharing your story.
Yeah, that was fun. Thank you.
Well, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Humans Outside. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not give us a little love and leave a rating and review to make it easier for other listeners to find the podcast too. It really does make a difference. Until next time, we'll see you out there.